The following is meant for entertainment and educational purposes. It is not meant to establish a doctor-patient relationship. Please consult your mental health provider for your mental health needs. Hello, welcome to Chez Eric, where we talk about psychiatry and religion with a focus on how to apply it to your life. I am Dr. Eric. I am a psychiatrist who happens to be religious. And we're going through the William James series, where we're Varieties of Religious Experience, and we're going through his lectures 16 and 17 on mysticism. And it's a I find it very interesting lecture. We've gone through describing the mystical experience, its components, that I think the major components are that you can't describe it, it reveals greater truth, all right, and there's a oneness with God that you gain with it. And now we have to ask the question, to what extent is the mystical experience authoritative? How much can we trust it? Can we trust it? To what extent can we trust it? Okay. And so in the final installment of mysticism, all right, we'll be going through that, and William James has a very set criteria to understand mysticism and its authority over our lives, whether it's true and whether we can follow it. Okay, and there are three parts to his framework. The first part, he says, is that mystical states have the right to be absolutely authoritative to the individual that experiences them. That's the first one. The second one is that for people on the outside, someone else's mystical state is not an authority for them, especially if they feel no private calling to it. And for the third, mystical states may have a greater authority over non-mystical or rational consciousness that is based only on the senses. So those are the three things that he highlights. So for the first one, mystical states are usually authoritative over those who have them, right? If you have an experience, okay, he says it would be vain rationalism to disagree. In other words, if you experienced God, and let's say God actually talked to you with a powerful voice, it would be very wrong to rationalize away to say, oh, it didn't exist, because you actually experienced it, right? That's what he would say. If a mystical truth comes to somebody and it provides a way to live their life, what authority does anyone else have over that experience and to tell them to live another way? We can send them to a mental institution, but we can't change their mind, right? And because our own rational beliefs, right, are based on things that are similar, like senses and experience, right? If we sense something mystical, why should it be different? You sense, you see things, you feel things, you hear things, right? You sense that. And if mystical experiences are also sensed, why do we dismiss that sense if we're trying to get to the religious experience? And if we sensed the mystical revelation just as much as with we other five senses, then that's something that we should believe. The mystic is invulnerable and must be left undisturbed in their own belief. Of course, this is not what James talks about, but I want to add, the question you're probably asking is, how do you know it's not a hallucination, right? Or someone who's sick with some form of psychosis. Should they then believe what their voice is telling? So remember that we're also going back to this idea of fruit. Psychotic induced belief or mystical experience is not going to create the revelations or the truths that a true mystical experience would have. And it wouldn't make a person's life better. So whether or not someone with, let's say, schizophrenia has a bajillion hallucinations, if all those hallucinations reveals a greater truth about the world and makes the person a happier, more loving person, then why not? Why is that not something the person should follow? The problem isn't with the presence of the mystical experience. The problem is with the fruit it provides. But if a mystical experience provides a fruit, provides a revelation that is greater and makes the person better, more kind, more loving, then that mystical experience becomes an authority for that person to follow. So that's William James's first major building block for understanding the authority of mystical experiences. Second building block, even though the individual with the mystical experience can see it as an authority, mystics, people who experience it, have no right to claim that others ought to accept those conclusions or experiences, especially if those outsiders do not feel a private call to it. And this is the main sort of thing about religion. It's that the most they can say is that the mystical experience exists. But when you have people who have a mystical experience and say, oh, I saw God, you better believe in him, that doesn't work. When someone says, I felt the loving presence of Jesus, you should feel it too, that doesn't work. It cannot work. It's not allowed. All right? At the very least, it would appeal to other people who have had similar mystical experience. But this is not a logical argument that I experience God, therefore God exists. You must experience God. It's not a logical argument. It's that I experience God. Maybe you have too. Let's share in our experiences or lack of experience. The classic religious mysticism is, he calls a privileged case, meaning that the classical mystical experience are extracts from the most fittest specimens, the most mystical, most saintly people, right? And they are preserved in these schools of thought, Catholicism, Protestantism, whatever you want to call it, different schools of thought, right? And it's ultimately carved out from a much larger group of people with mystical experience. So a lot of people are having mystical experiences, but the classic examples are the ones that are seen, those are the ones that we're going to follow, and then that's how it works. But then we have these schools of thoughts, but that mystical experience fundamentally cannot be the authority for you to follow unless you are also called to follow it, right? Right? They are very special cases and they observe observation, but again, they can't be the authority that because this saint had a mystical experience, therefore God exists, right? Religious mysticism says only half of mysticism. The other half, he says, is just mental illness. So there are two halves. Religious mysticism has a divine component, a religious component, but on the other half, it potentially could be related to mental illness, right? And there are many cases of mystical ideas that have been cited as pathology. So that's kind of part two. The third major building block for mystical experiences for William James is that the existence of mystical states means that there's more to understanding a higher power than just non-mystical states. And these non-mystical states are not the sole and ultimate determinants of what we may believe. What do I mean by that? Non-mystical states are just our everyday life, our everyday consciousness. And when you're told what to do, when you're told a series of rules of what to believe and what, let's say, to eat or not eat or whatever, that is not the sole determinant of religion, of your connection with God. That because the mystical states exist, that can actually override the non-mystical experiences that people have, okay? And these mystical states are, again, are super conscious, super sensuous, meaning that they override, they're above the senses, right? And that they supersede the experience of mere consciousness, because we always have to keep open the possibility that these mystical states are a superior point of view. James closes out by saying that mystical states aren't authoritative just because they're mystical. The higher ones point to a directions where religious sentiment, right? The higher ones point to a direction where even the religious sentiments of those who are non-mystical are moved by the mystical state. And they offer us a hypothesis that we might be ignoring because they expand our mind beyond what we would normally consider. And so if the supernaturalism and inner union with God is true, you would think that we should be compelled to believe it. However, philosophy has always said that you can prove religion through persuasive arguments. And so James has some issues with this idea that you can prove religion through discussion and discourse and intellect and philosophy, which is what he'll talk about in his next lecture, or eventually lecture. I don't think it's the next lecture. I'll figure it out, all right? Talk later. Bye. Hey, sign up for my weekly newsletter. I send out emails every week on psychiatry and religion. I realize that email is a great way to go deep into these topics. So if you want more content, check out Chez Eric and subscribe over there. Thanks.